Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. And I'm here once again to meet you with lecture 22 of Drama 2, that is Modern Drama. In our previous lecture, we started our talk about the fourth text of modern drama, that is Pygmalion, written by Bernard Shaw. We tried to explore a little about Bernard Shaw's life. We tried to understand what kind of writing style he picks up and what kind of ideology he has promoted in his writings. And we try to analyze those ideas in spatial reference with Pygmalion. Today we are going to move a little forward and we are going to start with the text itself, and I will introduce you with the plot overview, although I am positive that by now you are done with your very first reading of the play. However, just to refresh your memories about the plot line, we will discuss the summary of it, and then we will move on to our discussion on the themes projected in the play. So let's start with our plot overview. That is going to be a summary line of the story, and I will cover all 5 acts in this, starting from Act 1 and then ending on Act 5. One thing that you would notice that Bernard Shaw has taken those 5-act standard traditional plot style, where he has used the exact number of acts and all the kind of the standard traditional developments of plot, denouement, climax, and beginning and ending traditions. So starting with the story Pygmalion, as we discussed the other day, that it is basically based on a Greek myth that is about a statue that later on received the gift of life from goddess of love. So the story starts in a way that it's a dark and stormy night, and a crowd of people, they are seeking refuge from the rain in front of a church in London's Covent Garden Market. It seems like a marketplace where there are a number of people standing and they are seeking shelter because of rain outside, and it's shown that it's a dark and stormy night and it's a lot of heavy rain outside out there. And there are many people crowded under that one shelter, one roof, that is in front of a church in the market area. Now, in the very first scene, the location that has that is in the surroundings of a church, and this very thing is shown clearly, has a significance, and we need to understand it when we are trying to plot these themes. Well, now we see that among them are an older woman and her daughter, both dressed up nicely, showing their kind of status they belong to. Their son Freddie, who's been sent out into the rain to find a cab, an old, well-dressed military man, a poor young flower girl with a thick Cockney accent, and a strange man standing in the shadows, writing down everything the flower girl says. So here is a description of all those people who are standing and making that crowd under that shelter. And we are told that there are 3 people from one family, 2 women, where one is an elderly woman who is the mother, one is the daughter. Both are nicely dressed up. Their young fellow, their young son, who then later on is sent outside the shelter in order to grab a cab for both of these ladies, and an old, however, well-dressed military man, and a poor young girl who is selling flowers with a thick Cockney accent. In our previous lecture, we discussed the significance and the very understanding of Cockney accent. Basically, this accent relates to the lower class of London of 20th century, who did not have the privilege of going to school and having education, and if at all they will have education, access to education, they will not be able to have access to that standard accent of English, standard accent of language that was basically the identity of upper class and elite class in London in the 20th century. So then we see there is a strange man standing in the shadows writing down something, and what he's writing down is basically he's writing down everything that the flower girl says, not anyone else. Well, trouble starts when the older woman starts asking the flower girl questions. Now, flower girl is being questioned by the older woman. The girl flips out and starts telling everyone what a good girl she is. And we find in the very beginning, in the Act 1, the flower girl, whatsoever she's saying, she's more concerned about telling people what kind of girl she is. So this identity crisis, this feeling of shame for the class she belongs to is made very clear right in the beginning. So she's telling everybody that she's a good girl, and her dialogues are, I'm a good girl, I'm a good girl. All right. So then we see that the crowd comes to her defense, and everything seems fine until some guy informs her about the strange man taking notes. And we see that crowd shows its sympathies towards girl, and she was finding it difficult in the beginning to answer the question posed by the older lady, where she's trying to defend herself all the time. However, when she gets the courage from the crowd, she's speaking and speaking and speaking a lot. Now, the problem starts here, that some guy informs her that whatsoever she is saying is being noted down, and there is one strange fellow who's taking notes of her saying, and this scares her. People think he's some kind of cop, or maybe just a pervert. So there are different opinions about it. Somebody would call him some kind of agent, somebody would simply call him a policeman, somebody would call him, and there are different opinions about this strange fellow. She flips out again. Although it's pretty darn hard to understand what she's saying through her thick accent, until the note taker shows himself and everybody sees that he's not a cop or a pervert, he's just a rich guy with nice boots and a knack for guessing where people come from, geography wise. Well, so and the discussion goes on and goes on, and the girl is trying to inquire from this person that who you are and why are you taking notes of whatever I'm saying. And then people are giving their opinion. Somebody would call him cop, somebody will call him, an agent or things like that, so on and so forth. But in the end, the guy reveals his identity, that he is able to tell whosoever is speaking during this conversation. The strange man tells him, okay, where are you from, or where did you have your education, or which places have you gone through while your development stage. And this let the crowd understand that he's a kind of guy who is able to guess their geography somehow, that where they took birth and where did they grow up. Then people are amazed and at the same time frightened by this ability. Now people were not only surprised, how could he understand and how could he judge very well, where are they from, they were also frightened by this ability and they felt threatened. And same is the case with Eliza. Now he tells the flower girl to, well, shut up. She wins some more. He asks her to kindly shut up again, to please stop butchering the English language, except he doesn't say please. Well, so what happens now, that Eliza is not able, Eliza is the name of the poor flower girl whose notes are being taken by the strange fellow. And the strange fellow is Professor Henry Higgins. Now in her frightened situation, Eliza starts babbling and chattering like, obviously she wasn't making any sense before even, but now she becomes even worse. And when this starts there, Professor Henry Higgins tells her to shut up again and again, because he thinks the way she speaks is butchering the English language. However, what we find that in giving her shut up calls, he does not include any kind of courtesy in his language. Well, he then tells the old guy that he could pass off the crazy flower girl as royalty by teaching her how to speak. Well, now Professor Henry Higgins gets to get acquainted by a fellow over there that we later on get to know is basically Colonel Pickering, whose friend who has come from India just to meet Professor Henry Higgins. However, when this conversation is going on between both of these guys, we get to know that Professor Henry Higgins, in his proud and arrogant nature, says that and gives this statement that he is so good with language teaching that he can let a crazy flower girl with such a thick Cockney accent pass as royalty by teaching her how to speak. So his speech lesson are basically he's able to transform any girl with no language into the Duchess who keeps very sophisticated kind of language and articulation of speech. So the two men introduce themselves eventually. Turns out that they are both well-respected linguists. A linguist is a person who basically takes the field of language as a scientific field of study. So during their conversation, we get to know that the old guy, the well-dressed one, was basically Colonel Pickering, who had come from India just to meet Professor Henry Higgins, and both are linguists. The note-taker is Henry Higgins, teacher of phonetics. Phonetics is a branch of linguistics. The old guy, an expert on the dead Indian language Sanskrit, and we get to know that the old guy is basically an expert, a linguistic expert on language Sanskrit, that is an Indian language and it is known as a dead language. So Higgins takes pity on the flower girl and gives her a subversion. Imagine getting tipped $100. The girl jumps for joy, starts howling like a banshee. No, really, and jumps in the next cab. Well, now what is happening that the girl is again and again apologizing, and she feels threatened that because she doesn't know why is Professor Henry Higgins taking notes of her sayings, and she feels very frightened that she probably will get caught for some reason that she doesn't know about. So she's pleading and she's begging Professor Henry Higgins to consider her a good girl, and she keeps on telling him that she is a good girl and that she is a good girl. Well, the crowd tries to make her understand that this is not it, and the old guy, Colonel Pickering, makes her understand that this is not the story. However, in order to make her literally shut up, Professor Henry Higgins gave her a tip of almost $100, and that's like a treat for this poor flower girl. And what she does in the next instance, she jumps into a cab to carry her to Higgins' place. The two men head back to Pickering's hotel for dinner, and poor old Freddie gets left in the rain, abandoned by his mom and sis. Now we see that this act ends at that these two men, they go back to Pickering's hotel because Colonel Pickering is staying at a hotel, although he's come from India to meet Professor Henry Higgins. However, since he couldn't meet him so far, he was staying at a hotel. So both of these gentlemen, they go to hotel in order to have their dinner over there. And we find the other character, old Freddie, who went out of the shelter to grab a cab for his mother and sister. He's standing there in the rain in order to catch a cab, because the cab he wanted to catch for his family was taken by Eliza. And the mother and sister both are still standing there and waiting for cab. This was all about the Act 1. Now Act 2 starts the next day. The next day in Higgins' house on 10 Wimpole Street, Higgins and the Colonel are talking shop when Mrs. Pierce, Henry's very reasonable maid, tells him that a girl with a funny accent has come to the door. Now imagine who this girl would be, a girl with a funny accent. This girl is basically Eliza. Now next day, then both of these people are at Professor Henry Higgins' place, and we get to know what would have gone by in between these two acts, that when Professor Higgins would have gone to hotel to to dine with Colonel Pickering, he would have taken Colonel Pickering along with him, and they both were there now at his place. And when they are discussing, Mrs. Pierce, who is third character, important character in the story, who is basically a maid at Professor Henry Higgins' place, informs Professor that there is a funny accent girl at door who wishes to meet him. Now, thinking he might get some good material from her, he decides to let her in. Now we get to know that since Professor Henry Higgins is a linguist, and while listening to Eliza, he thought that it probably is a different kind of accent. So he started taking notes to understand what is this accent and what can he do with that. Now, he wants to meet her just for the purpose that he may get some more interesting facts, some more interesting materials about Eliza's language and her articulation. That is the reason he is willing to meet Eliza, and he says that out loud in the story as well. The flower girl from the night before comes in wearing some relatively clean clothes and what may just be the funniest hat you have ever seen. So we find that Eliza was the girl who was on the door. However, we now find her in kind of a different dress that is comparatively clean. Not clean altogether, however, comparatively clean. But since when we see her in the first act, she is a kind of a garbage bin, you know, all vegetables all over her dress, and she was a quite dirty creature over there. However, we find her comparatively clean in this act, and she is keeping a hat over her head, and we know that in 20th century keeping hat over head, this was women's style of you know, getting dressed up, and this was taken as a prestigious aspect of your dressing. So she introduces herself as Eliza Doolittle. Higgins is about to throw her out. He already has her accent when she demands to be given speaking lessons. So when she starts speaking, Higgins eventually finds out that there is nothing new for him. So what he wants to do, he wants to throw her out, because she is not a match to any of what he would like, even to a person to chat with, to talk with. However, what he soon comes to know, that she would want to learn, would want him to teach him speaking lessons. As if we go back and recall the statement that Higgins has given in the market area, that she can let her pass as royalty only by giving her few speaking lessons. So this became Eliza's motivation, and now what she's demanding those speaking lessons to become a girl, a sophisticated girl. So after some deliberation, Higgins is not ready to do it at all, and after some deliberation, after some conversation, some arguments between both of these personalities, Colonel Pickering and Professor Henry Higgins, Higgins and Pickering decide to take her on as a client. Only they treat the whole thing like a bet. And when we read the story, we get to know that Eliza tries to you know, do everything what she thinks that she can potentially do. She's ready to give them fee in order to let her learn these speaking lessons. However, a few bucks that already Higgins gave her as a tip will not be of any worth to him. So what is the condition? They both are ready and they both agree to take her as a student, rather as a client, is that Higgins bet on Eliza that in 6 months' time, she'll be, only by giving her speaking lessons, he'll be able to let her pass royalty test, just like Duchess. They really want to see if they can pass her off as a duchess in 6 months' time. So this is the bet that they set on her. So Eliza here is not a student for them, but a client, but only an object over that they bet. Higgins tells Mrs. Pierce to go burn all of Eliza's clothes and get her clean. Well, now as soon as Higgins accepts Eliza, he tells Mrs. Pierce to go and burn all of Eliza's clothes and get her clean. Give her a wash, and the way he says it, give her a wash, burn her clothes quickly, and wrap her into brown paper until you get some fine clothes for her, as she is just an object. While she's off in the shower, first of all, she's not ready to take shower at all, because in her life, she says that in her life, she has never taken a shower so far. So probably it's a kind of very funny situation to watch her going through that process. And I'm positive when you will watch this movie, this drama is filmed as My Fair Lady. So if you get to watch it, you will really enjoy it. Although in the beginning you will find it hard to understand because of the thick Cockney accent the girl keeps, and the overall environment is quite Asian in its approach. However, slowly and gradually, when you will sink into the movie, you will start enjoying it, and it's a hilarious kind of production. While she's off in the shower, a hulking dustman, that's British for garbage man, comes in and introduces himself as Alfred Doolittle, Eliza's father. And we get to know in the process, when she's getting washed out and she's packed into new clothes, somebody comes in. And who is this? It's a hulking dustman. It's a garbage man. It's Doolittle, Alfred Doolittle, Eliza's father, another key figure in the drama. Okay, so the Act 2 is on, and we see that now Alfred Doolittle, when he is in, what he demands from Higgins. What he should have demanded in a real situation would be his daughter. But now what he demands from Higgins is the price for her daughter. And he is willing to give Eliza away in order to let her learn speech lessons only in £5. Well, however, the discussion is very interesting, and Higgins is amazed by his speaking ability, and he does give him some cash too, but their discussion is interrupted by the entrance of a Japanese lady. Who is this Japanese lady? She turns out to be Eliza in a kimono, and without all the dirt and the silly clothes, Eliza's really pretty. She is a pretty girl. And she looks so pretty, and she looks so different without her all the clothes and dirt that even her own father is not able to recognize her. All right, Act 2 is still on, and we see that Eliza loves all the attention so much. She wants to go down to where all the other flower girls hang out and strut her stuff. And she is so happy to look so pretty and so different that she wants to go back to her place where all the other flower girls are and just want to show off herself. Higgins knows this is a bad idea and tells her so, and tells her not to do it. Mrs. Pierce lures her away with the promise of new clothes. Eliza hollows like a banshee again before skipping off stage. Pickering and Higgins shake their heads in disbelief. They've got a lot of work to do. Well, we see that the process is going on in Eliza in the process of learning, and when you will get to watch this, you will be amazed to see how interesting the process can be. And in between, we find that Eliza feels attracted towards showing herself off to her own fellow beings of flower girls. However, Higgins, Mrs. Pierce, and Pickering, they all mutually tell her not to do so, and they all give her different reasons for that. Higgins simply stops her. Mrs. Pierce, however, tells her that if she does not do it, she'll get more new clothes. And Pickering is a kind of kind person who is really kind to Eliza and tries to make her understand things by providing logical reasons behind things. However, Higgins and Pickering, they both are of the view that once Eliza met Higgins' mother, they need to do more work on her. It's not that an easy case. Act 3 starts from there. Act 3 finds us at the apartment of Henry Higgins' mom. Higgins, it seems, wants to test his work at a party she'll soon be throwing. Now, Higgins wants to, before that Higgins takes Eliza to a royal party, he wants to take a little test of his client, and for that purpose Higgins wants to take Eliza to meet his mother, and there is a tea party that she's on. Well, Mrs. Higgins does not approve of the idea. You get the feeling she doesn't approve of most things. Higgins does, but Higgins doesn't listen. He's not one to take no for an answer. He's also, we find out, not interested in women, really, except women like his dear old mother. Higgins assures his mother that Eliza will be on her best behavior and talk only about the weather and other people's health. Now, this tea that Eliza is going to is a tea party that Higgins' mother is throwing. And now when Eliza is meeting Higgins' mother, is basically a kind of rehearsal for the tea party that is going to be a test for Eliza, that she is going to pass for the royal test or not. And they both decide, Higgins and Pickering decide, that if Eliza is able to behave to their expectation, only then she can be taken to the royal party. However, Higgins' mother does not allow Higgins to do it, and she thinks it's not a good idea. Eliza might not be able to do whatever they expect from her. However, Higgins, as usual, ignores his mother's saying, and he's not taking this of any importance. And he says that Eliza will behave. He promises that he will behave her best, and that she will only be talking about two topics: one, the weather, and other, people's health. So she is going to be there only talking about two topics, and the mother, Higgins' mother, and the people who are of confidence are instructed to not to ask her any other question except these two topics. So her conversation is going to be topic restricted. So Act 3 is going on, and it turns out the whole thing isn't much of a party. The only guests are the mother and sister from the first act, Mrs. and Miss Ansfold Hill, good old Freddie, Pickering, and of course Eliza. Now, who are these people at tea party at Higgins' mother's place? Basically are three members of the same family we met in Act 1. This is Mrs. and Miss Ansfold Hill and a good old Freddie, the young fellow, and Pickering, Eliza, and of course Higgins. Eliza enters the party last, looking stunning, and proceeds to ask everyone, "How do you do?" And she acts a bit like a robot, a beautiful robot with a perfect accent and a very small vocabulary. Higgins spends most of the time trying to figure out why the Ansfold Hills look so familiar. Well, Act 3 is on, and we see that by the time he figures it out, Eliza has forgotten to stick to the script. And Eliza is taken away from her script. And it happened because, meanwhile, Higgins got himself busy in figuring out why Mrs. Hinsford looks familiar to him. And when he's trying to figure this out, Eliza is taken away from her script. She starts talking about how her aunt was didden by someone. Freddie, not the sharpest tool in the shed, is laughing like an idiot. His vocabulary seems pretty small too. For example, ha ha ha, how awfully funny, and killing. He thinks Eliza's a comedian, not a cockney girl. Higgins, embarrassed, gives the signal a cuff, and Eliza heads off like clockwork. Now, what is happening? That Eliza has, she was taken away from her script, and she started talking about her aunt. That sounded really funny and kind of abusive too, because this is not matching the standards of middle class that she was in at the time. And we find that she's indulged in this conversation with Freddie. However, the good thing is that Freddie is not very sharpest guy, and he also himself has very limited vocabulary, so he's not able to figure out whether Eliza is what she is saying now, or she is pretending to be a comedian. And what he takes her for as a comedian who is trying to just make him laugh. However, Higgins is quite embarrassed the way Eliza is behaving now, because this is what his mother talks about, and his mother asked him to take care of. Now, what he does, he gives Eliza a signal, a cuff signal, and Eliza heads off like clockwork. So, after the Ensford Hills leave, Mrs. Higgins gives Henry and Pickering a talking to. She scolds them like they're little boys, and she thinks whatever they are doing with Eliza is not at all appropriate. She's not an object, she's not an experimenting tool, she is a human being, so they should not carry out their experiment on a human being. So the Act 3 is still on, and we find that now what Higgins and Pickering do, they assure Higgins' mother that they are treating Eliza very well. Not like a doll at all, but Mrs. Higgins doesn't buy it. She doesn't believe in it. Things start to get heavy, and we are not exactly sure why. Mrs. Higgins is not at all comfortable with both of these guys treating Eliza as an object of experiment, and we do not know reason why, what is happening there. "You idiots," she says, "if Eliza learns to act like a lady, she won't be able to do anything to make a living." That's what Mrs. Higgins points out, and we get to know that at the time when it's being pointed out, both of these gentlemen, they take it very light and they do not really consider it as a point. However, later on, this becomes one of the major conflicts that Eliza goes through. Higgins and Pickering skip away, unconcerned, and they do not consider it at all. Now, Act 4 starts, and it's midnight at Wimpole Street. Some months later, Eliza comes in looking beautiful but tired. Higgins and Pickering stumble in, drunk and happy. They have just come from a bunch of fancy parties, and, well, it turns out their scheme worked, and we find Pickering and Higgins both are very happy. However, we find that Eliza is sad, although she's looking very pretty. Higgins has won the bet and is too busy tooting his own horn to congratulate Eliza. He and Pickering talk about the evening's event as though Eliza can't hear them, even though she's sitting right across the room. And we find a very strange conversation between these three fellows over there. Although practically it was between Pickering and Higgins, however, we know that Eliza is sitting there. But the strange thing is going on that both of these fellows are congratulating each other as if Eliza does not exist. And if it exists, and if she is the one who has made this effort and won this this prize in a way, she is not acknowledged at all what she has done. And both of these guys are taking all the credit of winning a kind of bet that they set in the very beginning of the play. They act like she's a kind of performing monkey, a puppet, a doll, a robot that they could really work with. And it's her, basically, it's their skill, it's their victory if they could let that monkey work the way they wanted. By now though, she's got a much larger vocabulary, and she knows Higgins can be a pretty miserable jerk. And she's not only good with language now, she understands behaviors, and she understands Higgins' behavior very well. Even after she brings Higgins his slippers, the two men don't pay any attention to her, and she is all the time being very kind to Higgins, and she tries to does things for him. However, Higgins does not pay it any attention, and over here specifically she brings him his slippers. However, they do not pay any attention to her. At this point, Eliza's just about ready to pull an incredible hug and strangle the two of them, when Higgins asks her to turn off the lights and give Mrs. Pierce his breakfast order. She throws his slippers in his face. She even threatens to kill him. And this is the moment when she's almost bursting out. All the anger, all the disappointment, all the confusion, all the disgrace that she had been keeping inside so far is now ready to burst out. And it's still Act 4, and we see that just as Mrs. Higgins warned, Higgins' work has left Eliza in a pickle. Although she has transformed into a lady now, but what is this lady to do now, and in which world she is going to survive? She doesn't know what to do with herself now that he's won his bet and she's mad. Just like Mrs. Higgins said, she's learned how to act like a lady, and now she's worried she won't be able to do anything to make a living. Which world she should go now? To her old world where it's dirt, it's a kind of self that she is told she has to be transformed otherwise, or into the world she was told about that she needs to be learn the sophistication of this world. However, she does not keep a match for it. Higgins tries to talk her down, suggests she get married, become a florist, etc., but Eliza doesn't listen. Higgins somehow, although he does not agree to it in black and white, however, he's trying to understand Eliza's conflict and her confusions, and in that conversation Higgins tries to suggest her a few solutions of the problem, and one of the solutions is that she becomes a flower girl and she opens up a flower shop, a better kind of status that she would keep now. And or the second choice can be that she can get married to a fine guy suitable to her expectations now. But Eliza doesn't listen to anything at all. All she wants to do is get out of there, telling Higgins that he can keep all the clothing and jewelry he bought her. Although this is one thing that Eliza was really crazy about in the beginning, however now when she gets to know that her pleasure is a lot more than these things, she is just ready to throw everything away and is ready to give these things back to Higgins. She wants to leave this house. This gets Higgins super anger, and now he nearly pulls an Incredible Hulk and hits Eliza. He gets so angry that he causes Eliza out, and that he accuses Eliza out and then storms out of the room. Eliza smiles for the first time, Shaw tells us, as Higgins slams the door. Higgins is known for a kind of temperature, for the kind of temperament that he never loses it. But now, because he never loses it, because he thinks he is a fellow who does not let emotions take over his control. But now Eliza, being the first person in his life, and she knows it too, that she has made it otherwise. And Higgins got angry, not only angry, rather very angry. And he slams the door behind him. Now it's the Act 5, the final act. The next morning, the Colonel and Higgins show up at Mrs. Higgins' place looking for Eliza, who seems to have run away. from the Higgins place. Higgins is acting especially winky, like a bratty child who's lost his favorite toy. Mrs. Higgins accuses the two men of scaring her off. Higgins can't handle the accusation. Woe is he! He's all confused. He says he can't find out what to do without Eliza. Mrs. Higgins calls the men a couple of winky kids. Once again, their conversation is interrupted by the appearance of Mr. Doolittle, Mr. Alfred Doolittle from Act 1, who appeared there to get money in order to give her daughter away, in order to give his daughter away to Mr. Higgins for his experiment. He appears again. This time he looks more like a gentleman than a garbage man. Turns out Higgins was right. Doolittle really did have a gift for the gab. An American millionaire has left him a ton of money, and now he's giving lectures all over England. Oh, and he's totally miserable. He misses taking money from people. We find that there is a kind of revolution in Mr. Doolittle's life, and what revolution it is, that he really has a gift of talking. An American millionaire has left him a ton of money, and now he's giving lectures all over England and making money. However, what he misses most is taking money from people, begging money from people. Mrs. Higgins decides that since Mr. Doolittle is rich now, he can take care of Eliza. Higgins objects, saying that he paid £5 to Doolittle for Eliza. The whole doll thing isn't sounding so silly now, is it? When Eliza finally comes down, she's been upstairs this whole time. She's been upstairs at Mrs. Higgins' place now. She gives Higgins the cold shoulder. The cold shoulder is when you show very rude to somebody. She tells Pickering how much he helped her just by treating her like a lady. And she's really very fond of Pickering because she really considers him a gentleman. At this point, Higgins is just about ready to throw a temper tantrum. He jumps for joy. However, after Eliza starts howling like a banshee again when she sees her father all dressed up. Doolittle announces that he is on his way to get married. Everyone files out of the apartment except for Eliza and Higgins, who have one last climatic chat. And we find that Alfred Doolittle so far has been living as an eligible bachelor, however, with Eliza's mother. And now finally he has made his decision of getting married. Higgins and Eliza are left behind. All the rest of people, they left to attend Doolittle's wedding. However, these two characters, the main characters of the story, are having the last climatic chat. It's a chat between the protagonist and antagonist of the play. Higgins starts waxing poetic, talking about the soul and humanity and how much he appreciated having his own slippers thrown at him. Turns out he didn't like having them brought to him in the first place. When Eliza accuses him of being mean and dismissive, he claims he's just being fair. He treats everyone from Duchess to Flower Girl the same way. Then he asks her to come back. She tells him to show it. She would rather go back to selling flowers on the street corner than to coming back to him. The two bicker some more. She says she'll marry Freddie. Higgins wants no such thing. He tells her she's a fool. She tells him he's a jerk. Finally, Eliza tells Higgins she wants her independence and that she'll go so far as to steal his secrets to get it. She threatens to use everything he taught her against him, to go into competition. This leads Higgins to her a damned impudent slut and then tell her, I like you like this. He tells her she's his equal now, but she won't have it. She turns and leaves. Higgins calls after her, telling her to buy him some groceries and clothing. He's sure she'll come back, she'll return. And the story ends there. So this was the plot line that we discussed about Pygmalion. This was the entire story. Now let us start with exploring the themes that Bernard Shaw presented in the play. In fact, there are many themes, but however, if we put them down under some main categories, they become to be almost 8 or 9 themes that we can discuss. For example, there is theme of language and communication, one of the major themes, theme of transformation, theme of identity, theme of appearance, theme of manipulation, theme of society and class divide, women and femininity, dreams, hopes and plans, ambition, middle class morality. We will not be able to discuss all the themes in this lecture, however, these are the themes that we are going to discuss in detail. Let's see how many we can cover today. Starting with the theme of language and communication, one of the major themes in the play. Language plays a very important role, and it has played a very important role in 20th century. We see that Beckett dealt with language as a medium of communication, and he condemned this medium as regarded as only medium of communication. However, here the situation is totally otherwise, and we find Bernard Shaw giving language significance that no other medium he thinks that keep as far as medium for communication is concerned. We hear language in all its forms in Pygmalion. Everything from slang and small talk to heartfelt pleas and big talk about soul and poverty. All these characters are basically representatives of different types of language and talks. Mr. Alfred Doolittle talks very rhetorically. He talks about things in a way that, where you can really manipulate language. He's God gifted for this skill. Mr. Higgins is basically professor of language, so he already has qualified this skill. Eliza, we see a transformation as far as language is concerned, from a Cockney accent to a refined accent of a lady. Different other characters are basically other representation of the language. So in fact, each character in the play, apart playing his or her role, is playing a role to represent one type of language and speech articulation. Depending on the situation and depending on whom you ask, language can separate or connect people, degrade or elevate, transform or prevent transformation. So the power that Beckett takes away from language, Bernard Shaw is basically giving it. Language, we learn, doesn't necessarily need to be true to be effective. It can deceive just as easily as it can reveal the truth, and this is considered as power of language. It is ultimately what binds Pygmalion together, and it pays to read carefully. Even something as small as a single word can define a person. Now, the theme of language and communication can further be divided into different categories to enhance your understanding of this major theme. For example, theme of language and communication is discussed in relation with science of language, in relation with act of speech, ambivalence, status, misinterpretations, influences, unifying force, emotional link, association, and rebel. And when we are discussing all these points under this theme, I am trying to take some dramatic references out of the play so you can really substantiate and pin down your point. We see that Higgins shows that speech can be regarded as a science and used as a tool. So he takes language and communication as an art, and for that matter, he considers language a science, and that what is his qualification is in, and his skills are. And for that, For that matter, we find him saying, he's a note taker in the very first act, and he says that simply phonetics, the science of speech, that's my profession, also my hobby. Happy is the man who can make a living by his hobby. You can spot an Irishman or a Yorkshireman by his brow. I can place any man within 6 miles. I can place him within 2 miles in London, sometimes within 2 streets. So he can tell, by listening to people, he can understand where do they have their living, what are the places they moved around or they lived in during their development of speech and language. That makes him the professor of linguistics. However, he invests speech with spiritual and cultural implications. English should be respected. He argues is important because it is the language of great artists and a gift from God. He considers English language a privileged language. He does not only consider language as a privileged skill, he considered English language as privileged language and considers it a gift from God. And says, a woman who utters such depressing and disgusting sounds has no right to be anywhere, no right to live. That's what he's saying about Eliza when he's taking notes in the very first act. Remember that you are a human being with a soul and the divine gift of articulate speech. That your native language is the language of Shakespeare and Milton and the Bible. And don't sit there crooning like a bilious pigeon. That is what he thinks about Eliza and all those who cannot speak language the way a language should be. However, there is a kind of ambivalence. Again, Higgins displays a sort of ambivalence about language. He treats it as a tool for social advancement, a suitable subject for scientific inquiry, and a medium for artistic expression. And here he is saying, as a note taker, you see this creature with her curbstone English? The English that will keep her in the gutter to the end of her days. Well, sir, in 3 months I could pass that girl off as a duchess at an ambassador's garden party. I could even get her a place as lady's maid or shop assistant, which requires better English. And that's the sort of thing I do for commercial millionaires. And on the profit of it, I do genuine scientific work in phonetics and a little as a poet on Miltonic lines. It's there where he makes a statement of teaching any flower girl and transforming her into a lady. And then we find the association of status with language and communication and the art of articulation. Higgins' understanding of language leads him to treat certain people less as human beings than as test subjects. Higgins says confidently, "Oh no, I think not. If there's any trouble, he shall have it with me, not I with him. And we are sure to get something interesting out of him." Pickering, about the girl? Higgins, no, I mean his dialect. Look at the confidence and look at the status pride that he's keeping. And here he talks about the girl's father. And the power of misinterpretation. Here Shaw demonstrates how easily language can be misinterpreted. What would seem like normal speech on the corner of Tottenham Court Road becomes novel and humorous in a new context. To Freddie, who is in convulsions of suppressed laughter, "Here, what are you sniggering at?" Freddie, "The new small talk. You do it so awfully well." And this is a talk between Eliza and Freddie. "Eliza, if I was doing it proper, what was you laughing at?" To Higgins, and Eliza speaks to him. "Have I said anything I ought not?" And this is how the misinterpretation, the power of misinterpretation of language is promoted by the writer. Now, just as he does in Act 1, Higgins associates the act of speech with the soul, the uniquely human spirit. However, here he also seems to make little distinction between the physical parts used in the act of speaking and the soul. And Higgins says, as if I ever stopped thinking about the girl and her confounded vowels and consonants, I'm worn out, thinking about her and watching her lips and her teeth and her tongue, not to mention her soul, which is the quintessence of the lot. And then we find that Bernard Shaw finds language as a unifying force. Throughout Pygmalion, correct language is portrayed as a unifying force. Here, Eliza demonstrates that it can also be divisive. It's not only unifying. How come? And Eliza says, I can't. I could have done it once, but now I can't go back to it. Last night when I was wondering about, a girl spoke to me and I tried to get back into the old way with her. But it was no use. You told me, you know, that when a child is brought to a foreign country, it picks up the language in a few weeks and forgets its own. Well, I'm a child in your country. I have forgotten my own language and can speak nothing but yours. That's a real break-off with the corner of Tottenham Court Road, leaving Wimpole Street finishes it. And she says it's speaking correct is not only unifying, speaking correct is breaking off as well, as she is broken off with her world, her country, her place, her location. And she is relocated. In fact, she is dislocated. Although she has been taught to speak properly, Eliza's old ways seem to linger on some deeper level, associated with emotion rather than intellect. And what happens here, we see Pickering speaking. He's incorrigible, Eliza. You won't relapse, will you? Eliza, no, not now. Never again. I have learnt my lesson. I don't believe I could utter one of the old sounds if I tried. Doolittle touches her on her left shoulder. She drops her work, losing her self-possession utterly at the spectacle of her father's splendor. Ah, ooh, and she's trying to make sounds that she would do earlier. However, she's unable to. But as soon as her father touches her, she makes the same sound as she would ever do. And that is the emotional bridge between the language that she keeps alive even now after learning a new accent. And other association can be that it seems strange that Higgins should say this, given that he associates the soul so closely with speech. He says, and I have grown accustomed to your voice and appearance. I like them, rather. Eliza, well, you have both of them on your gramophone and in your book of photographs. When you feel lonely without me, you can turn the machine on. It's got no feelings to hurt. Higgins, I can't turn your soul on. Leave me those feelings and you can take away the voice and the face. They are not you. And now Higgins, in their last climatic chat, this is Higgins who's speaking, who would associate with soul so closely with speech, and at the same time he would show so indifferent to emotions while speaking. He's making a contradiction very clear. And when Eliza asks him to go to his gramophone and go to the photograph book to find her there, as her voice is there and her appearance is there, with he's very used to now, he says that it's not her feeling inside, it's not her soul inside. By using incorrect English, by rebelling against the standards of English grammar, Eliza is able to rebel against Higgins as well. Language gives you power to rebel. Eliza, looking fiercely round at him, I wouldn't marry you. if you asked me, and you are nearer my age than what he is. Higgins gently. Then he is, not than what he is. Eliza, losing her temper and rising. I'll talk as I like. You're not my teacher now. And she is ready to rebel, go against whom she had been idealizing so far. And now there are few questions that you need to keep in mind when you are discussing the theme of language and communication. All what we have discussed so far regarding this theme can help you answer these 3 or 4 questions regarding this theme. Why would you think that why does Eliza start speaking in her old manner when she gets emotional? What does this say about her training or about Higgins' ability as a teacher? Another question can be, Higgins doesn't always use the kindest words when addressing Eliza. Given that language is so important to him, can you believe it when he says he treats all men in the same way? And another question can be, at Mrs. Higgins' party, Freddie and Clara confuse Eliza's normal way of speaking for the new small talk. What does this say about the way language works in different contexts? So this was all about today's talk. We talked about the plot overview, summary of the play, that is Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. And we started with our discussion on themes, and in today's talk we could manage discussing about language and communication in detail. I hope that in the next lecture we'll be able to talk about transformation, identity and appearance. This was all for today. I'll see you in the next talk, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.